There are certainly dangers of rampant AI overuse, but that's been true of everything that any technology has ever done. People overuse it until they start to pull back, right?
Welcome to the Imagine AI Live podcast. I'm your host, Chris Madden, and today we have with us Jason Cohen. Jason, so excited to have you here. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Of course. I'm Jason Cohen, founder, CEO of Simulacra synthetic data studio. Before this, I was founder, CEO of Gastrograph AI for 10 years. That company just was recently acquired by Nielsen's IQ, the Bases division. And before that, I was a professional tea taster. I ran a tea research group at Penn State University.
Wow. So tea researcher to synthetic data company runner. And tell us more about the synthetic data and what you're doing there.
Absolutely. So synthetic data is an emerging field. It's become very popular recently, particularly in areas where people historically or traditionally lack data quality or lack of data affordability. And I take a fairly controversial view on synthetic data. A lot of companies are using LLM-based tools. A lot of companies are attempting to do synthetic data generation for downstream model training. But my focus is actually on using synthetic data for causal scenario modeling. So I work predominantly in consumer and market research, where I say you're developing a product, you're developing an advertisement, you're developing a marketing campaign, and you want to know, does this product taste better than my previous version? Or does this product taste better than the competitor? Who exactly likes this product? About 60+% of the time that you go out to market and run a survey, this is, N equals 100, 200, 300 plus person survey, it's going to cost a company $50,000, $80,000, depending on their recruitment, depending on their screener, depending on their incidence rate. If a company says, you need to purchase our potato chip 3 times a week or 3 times a month, whatever it is, right, in order to qualify for the survey, that's going to increase the price drastically. And more than 60% of the time, that survey returns no usable results, right? It's not that the survey was wrong or bad. You just can't reject a null hypothesis. You can't say that you don't have the statistical power to say this was better, this was worse. And so what we do is we're able to take that data, and using synthetic data generation, we're able to learn the causal mechanisms that created that data. And then we're able to allow companies to use our platform in order to say, well, I wanted outcome X. I wanted my product to be on top. I wanted this advertising to work for women. I wanted this new brand strategy for this product to taste natural, right? What would I have had to do? What would I need to have done in order to achieve that? And the AI will run through millions of potential combinations, and it'll come up with the survey that you could have run, right? The survey that leads you to the most likely path to that outcome. And that's what we do. So we're doing very specifically tabular synthetic data generation, quite a bit different than a lot of the LLM synthetic data work that's going on right now. And like I said, I take a kind of a controversial view on the use of LLMs in consumer market research.
And so for those that may not understand, synthetic, another word for that would be like fake, right? Or like
generated.
Okay, generated. Yeah. And where real data coming from real people, and that's what like AI's already devoured all of the real data out there, and the AI needs more data to train on. So companies like you are creating synthetic data, generated data that the AI can train on, but it sounds like you're doing it in a more specific use case.
To an extent, so the data that the AI generates is no more or less real or fake than when you're currently using LLMs, whether it's for helping you write an email, helping you write a blog post, helping you do coding activities, right? It's not as if you would say that the data generated, that the outcome of an LLM helping software engineers write code, it's not fake code, right? So it's not more or less real. The question is it representative? Is it predictive? In coding, you have a verifiable ground truth. You could run your unit tests, you could run your regression tests, you can follow the logic of the code. But if you ask ChatGPT or Claude or any of them to say, why do people like Coca-Cola? Will you get reasonable, realistic, correct answers? Probably not. And that's true for a couple of reasons. One is because, yes, it's true that the models are trained on nearly all of the textual data that's available on the internet. And now we know from the Claude lawsuit that it's trained on thousands, maybe millions of books, right, that they purchased in order to put through the library. So when you do that, that text isn't attached to any consumer cohort. It's not attached to any demographic information about individuals. We don't know for the majority of the text on the internet, is this a man or a woman? How old were they? Where do they live? What's their purchasing habits? Do they like Coke? Do they like Pepsi? We don't have any of that information. And what that means is that you get some type of blended average, right? When you ask an LLM, why do people like Coke? And not only do you get a blended average, but if you look at consumer sentiment for when they're talking about products on the internet, it veers 75+%, 3-to-1 negative. People only write about products on the internet when they're complaining about something, right? 3 out of 4 times. And so most companies have shut down their social listening. Companies used to do this thing called social listening where they would read the Twitter fire hose data. They would look at social media comments and they were like, oh my God, everyone, dislikes our product. But actually it just turns out that people talking about products on the internet, right? It's majority complaints. And so they stopped doing that. But if they stop doing that, then why would we think that the LLM data is any better? Why would we think that that bias has gone away? It hasn't gone away, right? And in fact, that bias in many ways has been reinforced because how are these models trained? They're trained through reinforcement learning from human feedback. And so if you have teams of individuals that are saying this is a good answer, this is a bad answer, right? Well, what looks like text on the internet? What looks like reasonable outcomes? So you're taking things that are majority negative and then you're, for the most part, evening them out, right? Most of those reinforcement learning from human feedback is selecting for more positive responses. And so you don't have any form of representation. So I wouldn't say, this is a long answer to your question, is it real, is it fake? I wouldn't say it's either, right? But I would say that the data that it generates can be useful when used correctly. And so for us, what we're doing is we're taking much more specific data, screened consumer market research by usually large companies that do those types of survey work. And then we're not mixing that with foundation models. What we're actually doing is we're learning causal relationships. And for our data, the data that we generate, most companies that are using our platform don't build models on that. They actually just make direct decisions on it, right? Direct statistical inferences based on the generated data. So yes, we're going to move forward with this product, or yes, we're going to move forward with this marketing campaign, or we're going to change it in these ways before we do so. So it's really a decision intelligence tool versus a model training tool.
Let's walk through like a specific example of maybe somebody you've worked with, or you don't have to say their name, but give us an idea and kind of like the problem they had, and then what was your company's solution for that problem?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, very, very common one is simply on product development. The product development cycle, this is what my last company did. We were an early AI company. We built AI foundation models for flavor. So actually helping companies develop new flavors of food and beverage products, micro-targeting groups around the world. And the things that were great about that company was we had a proprietary data set. We collected data globally, 35 countries, 45 regions. And this is the company that was acquired by Nielsen's, which is one of the premier product development agencies. And so the bad things about that company were that we had to do tons of our own data collection. We were in a very specified format, and it was very, very specific for the predictions that we could make. We could only predict for flavor, aroma, and texture. So with this company, we said, well, we need to be more general. We need to be able to use our customers' data, and we need to be able to do this all in real time without new data collection. And so the types of problems that we solve are similar, but much more expansive. So one is in product development. Companies go and spend, X hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop a new flavor of a potato chip. And they hope that this version of barbecue gochujang, potato chip is going to taste better than either the other honey barbecues or the other special releases, the other seasonals, maybe even for a certain cohort, maybe they're targeting. And they say this needs to actually taste better than the standard product, right? Than the standard barbecue. And so that development cycle could be weeks or months. The cost in order to run a consumer test could be $80,000, $100,000, and they're not guaranteed to get any success in that. And so what we would do is that these companies can run a consumer test. They can run their product through a consumer panel, people actually tasting product, take that data, put it into our platform and say, I wanted us to be at the top of the stack rank. I know I have limitations on the amount of salt. I know I have limitations on the amount of sugar. Show me what I could have done. Show me what the flavor profile could be, right? If we wanted this product to have the highest level of preference. And then you could do with that much more complicated things. We have a company that has an internal panel. They have individuals who work at the company every day who taste products. Well, those individuals aren't representative of the consumer. And so they have a consumer panel. Consumer panel costs them 10 times more to run, right? In cost, they have to pay consumers to come in. And so what we do now is we take the data that they collect from their internal panel, and then we predict what the consumer panel would have tasted. So we have, right, side by side products A, B, C, and D that are tasted by both. And then every new prototype that comes onto their internal panel, we then take that data and generate what would have happened had they tested it with a consumer group.
So it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of money, and best of all, makes the chips taste better.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The gochujang barbecue chips sound really good. I live in South Korea most of the year these days. My wife's South Korean, and I'm back in Minnesota this summer. But gochujang is the best. So that doing good work there. So like consumer product, is this also for like software and like apps and things, like testing out digital products?
It could be. You would need to have a correct data set for that. I would say, beyond consumer products, the areas that we see a lot of work going into is in market and trends. So if you think, and if a company wants to go out and survey chief marketing officers or chief product officers of Fortune 500s globally and say, what are the trends that are affecting the market, or show me banks versus airlines versus consumer products versus, whatever, and get into these subsegments, then you wind up with data coverage issues, right? If you only have one banker who responded to your survey, right, you can't draw any inferences about banks. And so an area that we do see usage is in those types of targeted surveys for boosting low incidence cohorts, for understanding areas where you lacked coverage in order to make a more robust prediction from empirical data. We can help companies use that. So it's quite flexible. I mean, I would say one of the most fun things that we've done is looking at TV display ads. TV display ads are really difficult to analyze because you don't actually know who saw the ad. You can make some inferences about who watches the show and what types of consumer demographics usually look at those types of things on your TV, but you don't actually know if they saw the ad. So the ability to analyze that data is actually quite hard. You could say, well, do they agree with what we were advertising, right? If someone says they want to advertise that this product is natural, and then you go and you ask them, did you see this ad? Maybe they say yes, maybe they say no. And they say, do you think that this product is natural? You could look at that over some baseline rate, and you could say, okay, well, if they're suddenly agreeing with this brand attribute, right, then they probably saw the ad. So there are applications of this type of tabular causal modeling outside of consumer products. But my entire career so far, from tea to my last company, has been in consumer products. So that's just where my my network is.
How do you describe your origin story of like you growing up and what you wanted to be and how you came into being an entrepreneur and starting company?
Yeah. So I went to China in 2007 to study politics. Turns out blonde hair, blue eyes, bad Chinese doesn't really endear me to the government. So I didn't wind up studying much politics. Wound up spending a lot of time in the tea market. I was in southwestern rural China in Kunming. There was a group of older gentlemen in the tea market who humored me, let me sit with them, taste tea, practice Chinese. I had a passing interest in tea and everything at that time. My family liked food, liked flavor. But yeah, they must have thought I was hilarious because they kept me around. In Chinese, to say, like, I don't understand, they would ask me a question, like, where do you think this tea is from? Which of these teas are better? Is this north side of the mountain, south side of the mountain? Is this spring tea? Is this fall tea? Just quizzing me constantly on tea and tasting and saying, do you like this one? Do you like this one? And frequently, right, I mean, strong accents, older gentlemen, southwestern rural China, to say I don't understand in Chinese, it should be like Ting Budong, I don't understand the question, and say Wo Budong, which is like, I don't know if this tea exists, which is, they just thought I was an existentialist and they kept me around. So over time, over the months that I was there, figured out that something more was going on, got really deeply into tea and tasting, visited some of the tea gardens in further south in Sichuanbana. So then the following year, 2008, went to spend a harvest season on Makabari tea plantation in India, pick and harvest tea. 2009, did a long walk from Guangzhou, China, through Tibet and Nepal into India, focused on tea studies. Then went to Penn State University, where I was supposed to be on a political science fellowship, didn't do anything with a political science fellowship, instead started a tea research group that turned into an interdisciplinary tea research institute called the Tea Institute at Penn State. I was founder executive director there from 2009 to about 2016. Part of that was emeritus, and Next Generation came in. And so my first company spun out of my research at the Tea Institute. I was looking at quantifying methodologies for collecting and quantifying flavor preferences, perceptions, right? What do people actually taste in food and beverage products? And that turned into a platform for product development and optimization that's used by all of the major global CPG companies, the top soda companies, chip companies, spirits companies. Yeah, I was founder CEO there for 10 years.
And so I'm going to pause you there for a second. So that's very, very interesting. And so you developed or you built out like a taste profile, like all the different factors of what make up taste and an eating experience. And then you've got the different characteristics. And then I'm sure there's different scales as well. And I'm just fascinated if you can go into the complexities of that a bit, of like how many different profiles are there. I mean, I know that your tongue has like 5 different tastes on it or something, like bitterness, sweet, and things
kind
like
of.
that. Yeah, and I remember seeing that diagram as a kid with the tongue. So I'm very curious. So this is turned into kind of like the leading standard for a lot of these top companies to use.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Nielsen's acquired it in order to continue to grow and deploy that as a platform. But so the design of the platform, so 24 dimensions for gustatory flavor space. So things, you have your 5 basic flavors: bitter, sweet, salty, sour, umami. With that, inside each of those, you have other dimensions. So you could talk about sweetness, and sweetness plus sourness. You have fruits, you have florality, you have within bitter, you have herbaceousness and potentially astringency. So there were 24 different dimensions that was rated on a 1 through 5 scale. But within each of these, you have then specific, what we call reference flavors. So if you select fruits and you say, okay, I taste this product and I taste fruits at a 3, what specific fruits do you taste? Maybe you can identify it, maybe you can't, but you can go through and you can say, I taste apple, I taste peach, I taste nectarine, right? And then you can actually give those sentiments. So you could say, I taste nectarine and it's negative, I taste peach and it's positive, I taste apple and it's neutral. And we collected in hundreds of thousands of observations on this. We had a team that cycled the world, in different country, different region, almost every week. And running that type of large scale consumer research is chaos. Getting a flow through of about 100 people into a room to taste 10 products a day is pretty brutal work. I thankfully did not manage the panel team, right? But or I managed the panel team. I did not run the panels as CEO, but you just have crazy things going on. You have people who are lying to you about their age. You have people who want to get into the panel because they get paid, but don't meet the target consumer demographics. You know, you'll have something like, in order to qualify for a panel, you must use this product at least once a month, right? And then people will say, oh, of course, yeah, I drink whiskey once a month, right? And they're like a 22-year-old girl, you're like, it was probably not. But so you have to develop all these tools, even outside, even before you collect the data, you have to develop all these tools in order to screen individuals. And then they have to be motivated in order to fill out the survey, right? They can't just be button mashing. So we have all these then software live tools that we're monitoring to see, you know, are people on trend for how quickly they review, how many observations they taste, how different are they? Once you get that data, right, the hardest thing about this, and the reason that company was valuable, is the hardest thing about this was there was no verifiable ground truth. If I ask you, do you taste lemon, right? You taste a product, I say, do you taste lemon? You know, maybe you say yes, maybe you say no, but how do I know whether or not you taste lemon? And in fact, even by asking the question, right, I've already primed you above the baseline rate to taste lemon. So you can't actually do prompted asks. Companies that do, right, are for the most part, they're getting bad data. And so you develop these other forms where things like check all that apply and other things. So we developed some pretty interesting algorithms for what reference flavors did we display in what order under various conditions. By collecting that type of data, and this, I mean, again, this started 2009, right? This was long before the most recent AI boom. So we were an early mover in the AI space. And when we told customers and investors what we wanted to do, we said we're going to go collect a global data set of food and flavor products. We're going to use that to make optimizations and micro-target demographics, right? You know, so what do we need to do? We said we want to spend millions of dollars to go collect this global data set, right? We got laughed out of the room. Like, no one wanted to invest in that in 2011, 2012. right? No one was like, this is a good idea. And part of it, we didn't have the language to describe it. What we did was we built a foundation model for flavor, right? No one had that term at the time. No one had this idea that there was these properties of scale, but we kept at it. And so the platform, the AI started to work, and it really went live around 2016 and raised funding and really hit our growth curve around 2018. And yeah, then it was acquired this year, 2025.
Amazing. And I've got two more questions on that. So it's such a long road that you had to, from idea to, and maybe you didn't even think of it as this giant company you're going to build out in the future, but to being acquired today. How do you, as the CEO and founder, stay motivated and stay driven for that long period of time? And I'm sure there's lots of valleys and hills to get over. What kept you going?
Yeah, there's certainly a roller coaster. I would say that the motivation, or the last company being both my first company and being much younger, it took a long time to really hit a groove. We spent a lot of time in research and development and data collection, where no one really would have, like I said, no one wanted to invest in collecting a global data set, and we were just out there and doing it, and eventually it worked, and then suddenly people wanted to invest and support us. But that ability to basically spend 2-3 years in R&D, eating ramen, that kind of thing is not for everyone, and works when you're young and dumb and you're hiring a bunch of university researchers to go build something new. But it's not my recommended path. I don't think I would elect to do that again. And then once it starts working, once you see the products that you're developing out on the market, that was pretty motivating. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we did do at that company is we were pretty good about never working weekends. We worked 1 or 2 weekends a year. That's probably above average. So we're pretty strict on weekends.
That work-life balance and trying not to go crazy. It's a bit different from a lot of companies these days, I feel. I mean, 24/7, there's always news, always things going on.
Yeah. I work like crazy for this new company. This new company is tiny, right? It only started a little over a year ago, and it's 3 people. But with the new AI tools, with AI coding assistants and other capabilities, we're doing the work of 8 people, 9 people with just 3 people.
How many people worked at your last company? Like
at the top, it was about 30.
Is it publicly disclosed how much you sold it for or acquired?
No. Nielsen's private right now.
Yeah, and Nielsen's private, and it just happened this year. Well, congrats on the acquisition. That's very cool, exciting, and it opened you up to do this new thing. And so it's been a year building it, maybe longer than that. And what do you see as like the biggest challenge for you going forward? What are the demographics or the market that you still want to reach? What's the biggest roadblock?
Yeah, so large enterprise companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, CPG or consumer product companies is our number one target. I would say, on the food side, I'm somewhat well known. Built the leading AI company with the last one, so there's already a bit of a network there, which is quite helpful. But I would say the biggest thing is the early adopter cycle, and this cycle of, maybe call it fear of the unknown. As you said, is synthetic data fake data? That's a legitimate concern. And when you're talking to major companies about making multi-million-dollar brand decisions, you're talking to companies about leading products like Coke and Pepsi brand extensions, right? They're not going to immediately say, oh, of course, we're just going to make decisions based on this synthetically generated data that may or may not be real, right? And might be fake. And so one of the things that we need to do is educate the market and educate the users. And the second thing that we need to do is we need to separate ourselves from what everyone else is doing with synthetic data, which is based on LLM technology. And I think that there's a real problem there for synthetic data. I think a lot of companies out there have overpromised what the technology can actually do when using LLMs for the problems that I said earlier in this podcast about representation, who it's linked to, and whether or not you can get realistic results on the consumer side from an LLM. So being able to explain, no, the data is not fake, but not all synthetic data is created equal, and our data that we generate is higher quality. I think that that's the biggest challenge. And I don't know, by luck, choice, or chance, this is the second time in my career that I've elected to start a company that has a large education requirement, right? It's on the cutting edge of technology. We're not entering a saturated market. We need to spend the time and have the resources and be able to have the conversations in multiple levels of technical proficiency to say, whether we're talking to the chief financial officer of a company or whether we're talking to the head of AI, chief innovation officer of a company, we need to be able to have a conversation in a way that they can intuitively understand what we're doing, why it's different, and how they can validate that it works, how they can trust multi-million-dollar decisions, potentially billion-dollar decisions over the course of its lifetime. I mean, many of these products are doing over, a couple of these products are doing over $1 billion of revenue in a year, right? The brand portfolios could easily be doing over $1 billion in revenue a year. Is it too much to say you need to spend a couple $100,000 on empirical research versus you need to spend that money on making more predictive decisions and decision intelligence tools using AI? The answer to that is not always immediately obvious, right? What I would say is that this is coming, that AI is here. And so they have the choice of being an early adopter or they have a choice of being a fast follower because their competition is making the same evaluations. And so, did you have to be first to mobile if you were that type of company? No. Did you have to be first to direct to consumer if you were that type of company? No. But now these companies understand, right, where the opportunity and cost is. And so there's no company out there today. There's no product company that's using typewriters in place of computers or refusing to use the internet. So this technology is here. It's going to be permanently here. And the question is, where on the adoption curve do you want to be? Is it worth the investment now to be earlier on the adoption curve, both so that the the enterprise builds the pathways in order to effectively use it and so that new people coming in are effectively using it? Or are you going to cede that advantage to your competition and say, well, there's value in being a first mover. There's also value in the maturity cycle of software and technology. I have a strong view of that, right? I think early adoption, particularly in the enterprise, is important because it's going to take a couple of years to roll out and to suffuse itself into the actual operational cadence. So, there's no such thing as a fast follower in Fortune 500 company. You're either on the leading edge or you're not.
I just had a thought of what could be the YouTube title of this episode is "This guy wants to take test takers' jobs," or "AI is taking test takers' jobs." That's kind of what it is in a sense, is that, that you're telling enterprises, instead of having to spend so much money on human consumer feedback and sometimes unreliability of that, can use a little bit of that, but then use all this synthetic data and your company's AI to make the good taste decisions for you and help lead the taste profile of the products that they're selling.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So how do you feel about that? I don't think nobody's got like a taste tester on their CV or something. I think some people did, but very, niche. Yeah. It's kind of like a part-time job for people. People sign up for like things on the internet, like, kind of show up here. And that seems to be one of the biggest value props that you're offering the enterprises. Is that correct?
Yeah. I would say that there's still going to be individual panelists. There's still going to be people tasting products. I would say the bigger advantage is the analysis of the data. Actually being able to take that data and make decisions, right? Because you still need the person to say, oh, I liked it or I didn't like it or I tasted lemon or I didn't taste lemon, right? But because AI is not always going to be able to do that for you if it's a new product, if there's no prior existing data about that product. So you do need some empirical data, right? I think that the bigger difference is if you ran that test and you were hoping to get your action standard was 75% of the panel likes product A more than product B, right? And you're at 60%. Well, the test failed, right? You don't get to make a decision. So what could you have done, right? Could you have changed the product? Could you have changed the panel? Did you need more women? Did you need more men? Did you need more older individuals, younger individuals, wealthier individuals, middle-class individuals, right? Who was it that liked the product? What were the drivers for the demographics and what were the drivers on flavor? Could you have made it sweeter? Could you have made it more lemon flavor, right? And so those types of questions that even if you were to run a full-size survey, you can't always answer is really where the value is. It's less about taking away, hopefully we can reduce the amount of data that's required, right? Some companies are out there running N equals 1,000-person surveys to make a decision, right? It's probably overkill. With AI, you don't need that many respondents. But I think more valuable than that is predictive decision power.
Does it compound on it? So, like, the more that you use your AI product, like the longer they use it, the more data that has been built and makes it easier in the future to make these decisions as an enterprise?
There are methods in order to do it that way. One of the decisions that we made is to train models zero shot. So we actually don't retain or store any customers' data. So a lot of customers are very, very security concerned about the propriety of their data. And so we run all of our AI in isolated single tenant containers that are ephemeral, that only exist for that user in that company. And so we don't actually blend, mix, retain data. We don't update or models on customer data. So we train each model zero shot as they're using it. That is likely the right decision right now. I think eventually we might offer some type of retained data or mixed on-prem deployment where your data rests in your systems but could be re-uploaded to our systems. How would they go about doing, as you said, compound learning? They would download the data off of our platform. So any data that they generate is, they're freely allowed to download. It's their data. They have
keep it there themselves.
Permitted or revocable license to anything that they generate on our platform. And so if they were to collate that data, they would be able to engage in compound learning. But we try to dissuade them from positive feedback loops, from generating data and then uploading generated data onto the platform. That's where you get into some problematic circular logic there.
I've seen like a robot tongue before, like robots or computers being able to like taste things and give a taste profile. How is that coming along, or what's the last you've heard of that?
Every 10 years, someone claims to have developed a new electric tongue or electric nose, and the entire industry goes and does a proof of concept project on it and decides that they'll try again in 10 years. More recently, there's been some new breakthroughs. That type of electronic sensing work, I am very skeptical of it, because think about your own purchasing habits, your own purchasing decisions. You purchase products based on what you like and dislike. And what you like and dislike is, yes, based somewhat on physiologically. We're going to have similar physiological responses to an underlying sensory stimuli. So if we both taste lemon, there's going to be a certain amount of KPA, a certain amount of acidity that's going to cause us to perceive some level of sourness, right? But should I assume that you and I are perceiving the same thing, that we have the same sensitivity to sour, that we have the same sensitivity to bitterness, that we have the same tasting vocabulary or identification skills? Should I assume that you grew up in, I don't know, maybe you grew up in California, and the California lemons are actually predominantly Meyer lemons, and they're sweeter lemons and they're less sour, and you developed a preference for that through repeat exposure. I grew up in Florida surrounded by citrus, and so my sensitivity to sour is much more attenuated from repeat exposure to flavor. So there's this whole perceptual layer. And because you and I differ genetically, because we differ in our, not just our physiological response, but also in that cognitive layer, in the attenuation, in the identification, in the past tasting experiences, not only do we not know what you're fully physiologically perceiving, we don't actually know your perceptual cues, right, that your preferences are based on. And so the idea that somehow you're going to get an electric tongue or an electric nose to say, okay, are they getting some signal? Yes. Is that signal repeatable? Yes. Does that repeatable signal have any bearing on what anyone is going to buy? No. Right? How could it? There's no perceptual layer there. So this idea that you need electric tongues or electric noses, or that type of robotic sensing is going to replace human tasting, I'm very skeptical of, because, right, humans are making purchase decisions based on preferences, and the preferences are based on cognitive layers that aren't directly testable by chemical assays or by any type of electronic sensing.
Great. All right. Well, Jason, let's go into a rapid fire round here. I'd like to know, what are you most hopeful about with AI technology in the future?
What am I most hopeful of? I think that what I'm least hopeful of is, what everyone's now calling AI slop. I think data provenance, I think generative provenance, being able to say, having, as these tools become more fully featured and more capable, being able to positively identify, this was created, ChatGPT, this was created by Claude, this was created by Gemini, I think is going to become increasingly important. I mean, I'm not the first person to come up with this metaphor, but you've heard of low background steel, right? Steel that was forged before atomic testing, nuclear testing, which is necessary because steel that was forged afterwards has different resonant responses. And if you put it near atomic instruments, right, it can throw off your readings. Well, where is our low background internet? Where's our low background data? Where is the data that existed before this explosion of AI on the web? Because now one of the problems that they're having in training next generation models is low quality data, low quality responses that were generated by prior versions of LLMs. So too much slop on the main internet channels. So that's what I'm least hopeful for. What am I most hopeful for? I think it's going to entirely change employment patterns. I think that if the technology is harnessed and used correctly, that we are a couple steps closer to knowledge work being proliferated, right? I mean, already the way that I develop the application itself, right? I don't find LLM very useful for data science work. I don't think that they're trained quite well enough, but I find it incredibly helpful for software engineering work, right? And getting agents to work in a tight loop in order to rapidly help develop software, I think is incredibly powerful. So I'm most hopeful for seeing through that change in employment patterns. And there's probability that it's directed in a good way versus a bad way. But I don't think it's going to cause mass unemployment, but I do think it's going to drastically change the way that firms are staffed and the size of companies. I think there's going to be a lot more smaller companies.
What do you think people looking for jobs, young people, what should they be focused on in this age of AI? I mean, maybe you're considering hiring more people looking for jobs, and it's a tight market. There's a lot of layoffs. I mean, how can people rebalance in this age of AI?
Yeah, cultivate taste in everything. That might sound like a weird answer, but we turned down a candidate who did quite well throughout the interview process, but it was very, very clear that she did quite well in the interview process using LLMs. And she was using LLMs effectively, right? I mean, the technical interview passed, the creativity was there, but it was every email, every portion of the interview had that, what some people call a model smell. You could tell that it wasn't human written, right? The problem is not that the work was bad, but that it wasn't clear if she knew that it had a model smell, right? If we could see it, right, who else can see it? And what does that mean for where was she applying her unique taste? So what I would say to people is using the LLMs, using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever is fine, right? But you need to have enough taste and experience to know when the human touch is needed. It's easy to copy paste an email and say, say yes, respond to this positively, say yes, right? And get something back, right? But is it obvious that it's LLM written is a question. I would say cultivate taste in everything. It becomes easier the more that you do, whether it's literature, art, movies, music. I think messing around with Suno, the AI music generation, is a huge amount of fun. Absolutely no skill in making music. Listening to music and developing a taste for it, and then pushing an AI to see what an AI can do. And most songs you reject and you say, this is not good. And then, maybe 1 in 50, 1 in 100, you say, you get that shiver and you're like, okay, this could be human made. And developing that type of taste, I think, is going to become increasingly important as firms require you to do, require their staff to do a lot more with a lot less, leaning on this technology.
I think that's a really interesting answer by you as somebody that has built AI taste profiles. You need taste in this world today. You need personality, authenticity. You need to be true to yourself and have developed opinions.
Yeah.
To stand out, because especially you're trying to get somebody to have that phone call with you and like speak face to face. I mean, everyone's using ChatGPT to help and stuff, but it's just in the emails. I think that's why a lot of people purposefully not typing in perfect grammar now and like not typing in, capital letters all the time. Cause it's just like, no, I just typed this out right now. This is my train of thought. This is like me. This is authentic me. And it comes across more human and more authentic and true to yourself. So that is good advice. And it is, developing that taste where you've been able to enjoy it in the arts, watching movies, TV shows, music, things like that. Jason, is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience? First of all, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like us to cover?
No, I think this has been an amazing session. I really appreciate it. I think the question that a lot of people are wondering is what's next and where is it going to have an impact? The only place that we've really seen AI having a truly disruptive impact so far is in coding, is in software engineering, software development, right? That's one of the primary moneymakers, motivators. And it's part of the idea is that it's a closed system, right? You can test, you can validate whether or not the AI is generating usable code. I think there's a big open question that people are wondering around where this is going to have an impact, right? There's fears about, is it going to put artists out of work? Is it going to put copywriters out of work? Is image generation going to replace illustrators? When those fears are well placed, I think that like most technology, this is going to shake out in a way that's more positively shaped than a lot of people believe. And so if I can end on anything, it's that there are certainly dangers of rampant AI overuse. But that's been true of everything that any technology has ever done. People overuse it until they start to pull back, right? I mean, at least my generation was at the height of phone overuse, phone addiction, doom scrolling. We're already seeing next generation that's grown up with it having much more sense of self and preservation with it. Digital detoxes, lack of phone use, people who are totally off of social media. I think the cycle will continue again.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And where's a good place for people to reach you or contact you or your company?
Yep, Simulacra data and email. I know, very old school, but that's the easiest way to reach me. Live in the inbox.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thanks so much.
Cheers.
That's one small step for man.